This is the video lesson for Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court case. It took place in the year 2000. In this court case, you're going to see how Bush and Gore had to go to the Supreme Court to find out who the president was going to be. But first, I'm going to start with a clip. In the clip, you will see the now Superintendent of Pasco County Schools, Kurt Browning. If you write down the position he had at the time of this video on the top of your paper, I'll add a couple extra points to your assignment. So you're looking for Kurt Browning, and you want to write down what his position was back then in 2000 at the time of this court case. So follow along with the video, and I'll come back and explain the rest of the assignment to you when it's over.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
Turn the lights down. The party just got wilder.
Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
Bush wins. Headline of the hour. Folks, it might be premature.
So we take Florida away from George W. Bush.
This is no longer an election. This is like Alice in Wonderland.
The one thing no one expected in a presidential campaign is that we wouldn't know who won on Election Day.
Count our votes! Count our votes!
Bush versus Gore was a watershed moment where the curtain was lifted on our election system in the United States, and we realized we've got to do something to fix it. And in some ways, Congress did, but then there were the unintended or possibly intended consequences.
If you are just waking up and just tuning in, you should know that after a long night of swing votes, the presidential race is frankly still too close to call.
On November 8th, Kurt Browning, the supervisor of elections for Pasco County, woke to shocking news.
The vote is now so close between them that there will be an automatic recount.
What are you talking about recounts? I'm in bed. There's no recounts going on. And literally within 3 hours, we were in the throes of a recount.
The tug-of-war for the presidency is now down to the most local of politics, counties in Florida, precincts in Florida, where the recount has begun.
5A11 is a vote for Gore.
Under intense media scrutiny, the flaws in Florida's system became clear.
Vote-o-matic machines and conflicting rules about ballots and fuzzy rules about what is a vote.
It's slightly detached.
Democrats charge a confusing ballot layout led voters to think they were punching the ballot for Al Gore when they were actually voting for Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan.
3,500 people did not vote for Pat Buchanan. Come on, this is heavily Democratic Palm Beach County.
It is a ballot that was approved by an elected Democratic official. And hey, guess what? There were no complaints until after the election.
As both campaigns launched lawsuits over the disputed results, accusations of partisanship fueled the tension.
I voted. Whether or not my vote counted, I don't know.
The question of who will be the next president is right on her desk. She's the Secretary of State, Katherine Harris.
As Secretary of State, I am Chief Elections Officer.
Harris was the state co-chair of George Bush's presidential campaign. Today, Governor Jeb Bush said she is doing a good job.
I think she's doing the right thing.
Political insiders say there is no evidence Harris is being manipulated by the Bushes.
What I think people didn't realize before 2000 is that the people running the elections had a huge stake in the outcome.
While each campaign battled it out in court, the recounts dragged on.
I make this record.
No, you don't need to make a record.
I do need to make the record.
We were in the middle of the final recount when somebody's phone in the room rings.
36 days after the election, the U.S. Supreme Court brought everything to a halt.
It does appear quite clear that George W. Bush, the eldest son of a former president, is going to be the president-elect of this country with the 25 electoral votes from Florida.
The court declared that the recounts violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause because there was no uniform standard for counting all ballots.
Good morning.
The overwhelming consensus after 2000 was that our electoral machinery was broken. We did not run elections as well as we should, and we should fix that.
So as you can see from that video clip, it was a very contested subject about who would be president. Now, in the end, George W. Bush did win and become the 43rd President of the United States because of the Supreme Court decision. So, let's do a little more research and figure out more information about this court case. So, in front of you, you should have a handout. It's two-sided and it looks like this. On the handout, you want to start with the side that has the map up front. We're going to do a close read, so have a pen, pencil, or highlighter ready so you can mark the text as we go through the reading.
Let's start the close read for Bush vs. Gore, 2000. Remember, have the side facing up that has the map on it, and we're going to start where it says the facts. You want to have a pen, pencil, and highlighter if you have one ready. The facts. Put a number 1 next to the word the facts and circle it. In 2000, Americans experienced the closest presidential contest in their history. Underline or highlight that sentence. When Americans went to bed that election night, it was still unclear who their next president would be. In the end, the election hinged on which candidate, Vice President Al Gore or Texas Governor George W. Bush, had won Florida's electoral votes. The award of Florida's votes was delayed because of errors that had been made in the voting and counting of votes, especially on many paper ballots. So underline or highlight that. The award of Florida's votes was delayed because of errors that had been made in the voting and counting of votes, especially on many paper ballots. And then next to that, put a star, because that's the problem. That's what caused this whole thing. You know, they needed to get those votes so they would know who would win, and there's error, and they had to look into it. A recount was started in some districts because of disputed votes. George W. Bush filed to stop this recount. He said, look, everything went fine. There's no reason we need to recount it, so I'm going to go file to get this recount stopped. Let's say who won, and then that's that. The Florida Supreme Court, so not the actual United States Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court of Florida, the Florida Supreme Court ruled against Bush. So they told George Bush, nope, we're recounting, and ordered a count by hand of all the ballots in the state. So underline or highlight, the Florida Supreme Court ruled against Bush and ordered a count by hand of all the ballots in the state. And put an exclamation point, because that's interesting. Put an exclamation point next to that on the side. However, there were no uniform standards for determining when a ballot would be counted and when it should be rejected. Moreover, such a count could not have been completed before Florida was required to report its vote to the Electoral College. Bush filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court to halt the recount.
Take a look at the map on the bottom of your paper here. This map is the one that's right behind me. If you look at the map, you can see that George Bush and Al Gore were pretty evenly matched, and it all came down to Florida. Florida was worth 25 points. Now, if you look at the bottom of your paper here, George Bush had 271 points, and Al Gore had 266. So, winning Florida decided who's going to win the election. Now, as a quick recap, what do I mean by points? Points are based on each state has a certain amount of votes in the electoral system. The electoral votes are based on the population. So states with a larger population, like California, they would have more votes. Smaller states, like the ones you'd find out in the Midwest, they have a smaller amount of votes because they have a smaller population. So the more people you have, the more votes you get. So Florida was worth 25 points, and whoever won Florida ended up winning the election. After you're done looking at the map, turn to the page. Now, if you want to pause the video for a moment and take a look at the map and see which states are worth more, it's kind of interesting to tell where more people live. You can tell which states have the larger populations, but have the most people living there. And then, when you're ready, continue on with the close read.
You should now be on the back side of the handout, starting with the legal issue. The legal issue. Did the lack of standards for manual recount of the vote violate the Equal Protection Clause and due process rights of the 14th Amendment? Put a question mark next to that in the margin so you know that's the question that's being asked. So, did the lack of standards in the manual recount of vote violate the Equal Protection Clause and due process of rights of the 14th Amendment? So they're saying just because of the fact that they may or may not have messed up or weren't doing their voting properly, does that give them the right to then change the rules and recount and redo how they agreed to do it in the first place. Because he's saying he has equal protection. We all need to be treated equally. So you can't give them special treatment if you're not going to give it to me. So could they do this recount just to see if he may have won? The decision or outcome. The Supreme Court was sharply divided. By a 5-4 vote, it halted the recount because of the absence of uniform standards and the fact that legally questionable votes might have been included in the recount. So underline or highlight that and put a 2 next to it. So the Supreme Court agreed there's no special recounts. It stays as it is, and how it was that George Bush won Florida. The court was sensitive to the fact that it was sharply divided and also interfering with the people's selection of their president. The majority opinion pointed out that 7 of the justices agreed that a manual recount in Florida would have been full of problems. 7 justices of the court agreed that there are constitutional problems with the recount order by the Florida Supreme Court that demanded a remedy. The only disagreement is as to the remedy. None are more conscious of the vital limits on the judicial authority than are the members of this court, and none stand more in admiration of the Constitution's design to leave the selection of the president to the people through their legislatures and to their political sphere. When contending parties invoke the process of the courts, however, it becomes our unsought responsibility to resolve the federal and constitutional issues the judicial system has been forced to confront. Bush v. Gore. The dissenting justices, so the ones that disagreed, the other 4, felt that the recount could have been properly handled by Florida's courts and that denying this fact was an attack on the judiciary itself. Although we may never know with complete certainty the identity of the winner of this year's presidential election, the identity of the loser is perfectly clear. It's the nation's confidence in the judge as an impartial guardian of the rule of law. So that's what the people who disagreed were saying. So now down to the significance. In Bush v. Gore, 2000, the U.S. Supreme Court halted the recount of the manual votes in Florida. As a result, George W. Bush won Florida's electoral votes and became the next president. Underline or highlight that sentence, put a number 3 next to it, and a couple of stars, something that makes that stick out, because that's why this case is important. Even though his opponent, Al Gore, had received a larger share of the nation's popular vote. You've now completed the close read, and continue on with the video. Now that you've finished with the close read, you need to write your case summary. Remember, the 3 questions you want to answer during a case summary is 1, what is the background story? 2, what did the Supreme Court say about it? And 3, why was this case significant, which means important? Now, when we marked the text, we marked 1, 2, and 3. So you should be able to find those answers, read them, think about them, and then rewrite this into a summary using your own words.
After you finish the case summary, you're going to have a chart which looks like this in front of you. On the chart, you need to fill out all the information for the court cases. Now, to help you with this, I provide review cards. You can see the review cards give you a great deal of information on all the cases. Now, you have a class copy of these with each set of 2 desks. You can work in groups of 2 and talk to each other to make sure you fill in the charts correctly. Now, this chart will be a big grade, but it's a summary of everything we've been working on. So make sure you write in complete sentences, give proper details, and answer the question fully for each column. After you finish that, raise your hand, and I'll let you know what you're supposed to do next.